Thanks everyone for coming in today for the Empowering Communities with Legal Kiosks event at A2J Tech. So I'm going to first start us off with some quick introductions and Dori, Susan, Elliott, I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves and your respective programs later after I explain what legal kiosks are. But to those of you who are not familiar with us, hello everyone. My name is Laura Steinbach. I am the Legal Kiosk Practice Area Lead at A2J Tech. And today I have with me are Dori Rapaport, the ED of Justice North, Susan Meyers, the Pro Bono Director of Nevada Legal Services, and Elliott Fontenette, the Special Projects Managing Attorney at Texas Legal Services Center. So before we dive into the panelists and the Q&As, I first want to start us off with explaining what are legal kiosks, why they're here, and where you can find them, just in case we have any newbies in the webinar. So essentially, a legal kiosk, as pictured here, is a public-facing lockdown Windows text desktop. So essentially, users are only navigating the resources that you link out to on the user interface. The key features include attending virtual meetings. So this is court hearings and also hearings with attorneys, or sorry, sessions with attorneys. You can also apply for legal help, browse legal resources, print and scan documents for free. We also have data tracking and accessibility software enabled on these kiosks. So now that we know what they are, I'm going to explain why they're still needed. And according to the 2021 study by the Pew Research Center, many adults with lower income, so adults making $30,000 or less a year, out of them, 43% don't have home internet access, so they need to go somewhere public to even access the internet. 41% don't have a computer, a lot of them, so 76% of them have to rely on their own smartphone. So it's thankfully a lot of them do have smartphones to access internet resources. However, as a previous law student, I can only imagine having to do legal research on my phone and also trying to apply for legal help that way. I can only imagine how much harder it is to do on a smartphone. I personally need at least two screens, so I can only imagine how hard that is. And having a public-facing computer to help people that need to do this legal research to fill out forms on Adobe or Word is immensely helpful. And additionally, what we were noticing with the data that we're gathering is many people are using these kiosks for free printing and scanning, which a lot of people don't necessarily have at home. So now that we know the what, the why, where are they located? They're located across the US. We have them in Minnesota, Texas, and Nevada, of course. And we also have some in Massachusetts, Michigan, Florida, North Dakota, and Georgia. We have also on the horizon Arizona and California. We have a total of 296 kiosks online, and they're spread across different host sites like courthouses, agencies, nonprofits, legal services organizations, libraries, and other community centers. So now that we know what they are, I'm going to pass it off to Dori to kick us off on explaining her legal kiosk program in Minnesota.
Thank you so much, Laura. Hi again, everyone. I'm Dori Rapaport. I'm the Executive Director of Justice North. My program serves 11 counties, which is about 27,000 square miles across the northeastern area of Minnesota. And I'm going to talk to you today about the Minnesota Legal Kiosk Project, which is actually a collaboration with other Minnesota legal aid programs. In 2020, we came together and we asked for CARES Act funding to really address this digital divide that was so evident when the whole world went virtual, legal aid services went virtual, and courts went virtual in Minnesota. And for context, it's important, I think, to note that Minnesota courts are still, a lot of civil cases are still virtual today. And so we were able to secure 3.5 million in CARES Act funding, which is why when you look at Laura's previous slide and you see a saturation of kiosks in Minnesota, we have 253 of the kiosks that Laura mentioned in the US. And so they are scattered throughout our whole state in urban and rural areas. We'll talk more about what that looks like, the host sites, the models, the functionality later in the presentation. But we're just so fortunate that we were able to receive this funding to have this incredible technological infrastructure that really for us ended up being a pandemic positive, and has allowed us to have just additional entry points to receiving legal services, to getting help with forms, to having those printers and scanners and screens available for people to meaningfully engage with their legal matters. And so we're excited to talk to you more about our project today. So I'll pass it back off.
Susan, could you give us a brief overview of who you are and your Nevada Legal Services kiosk program?
So I am currently the pro bono director of Nevada Legal Services. I had a background with one of the other legal aid organizations in the Las Vegas area, Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, where I'd been for 11 years. And I actually left there to join NLS for the kiosk project. So I did that, and then that morphed into pro bono director. But our program actually, piggybacking on Dori a little bit, ours was a collaborative idea of our Aging and Disability Services division with CARES Act funding, our State Bar Access to Justice, and our legal aid providers. And we have 5 of them in the state. So they all thought this was a great idea. It was inspired by Minnesota's project for the same reasons Dori mentioned. But NLS agreed to administer the grant, so that's how it wound up under NLS. And we've been, we got it going and have been keeping an eye on it since. The main goal, though, because it was through our ADSD, our Aging and Disability Services Division, ours was supposed to be geared to seniors. Now, of course, everybody can use it, but when I designed it, and I'll show you a little bit about ours, is maybe a little different than some of the others because we don't have a law help centralized resource in Nevada. So basically I had to pull everything together and provide links to all this information through our kiosk. But we tried to keep in mind, seniors, and especially those who aren't as tech savvy, how would it be easy for them to use? Our project is a little different in that it's limited to public libraries. Now that was influenced by Legal Services Corporation, which NLS is the Legal Services Corporation entity in Nevada, and we're the one statewide entity. But anyway, recognizing it's influenced by Legal Services Corporation's Public Library Initiative. So that was what influenced at least our Access to Justice Commission. They saw that. So combined with Minnesota's project, we came up with limiting it to public libraries, which has had some advantages. We did that in large part due to the fact that they're already a trusted resource for information in the community. So we have 22 of them across Nevada, available in English and Spanish, and basically provide the same information we've discussed. And I don't know how much you want me to go into this about the advantage of being in the libraries, but we found it works for us because we've also partnered with our state law librarian in training librarians on how to use the kiosks to provide information to their patrons. So we might get into that a little more, but that's the Nevada program in a nutshell. And it is a mix of urban and some very rural locations.
Thank you, Susan. I'm now going to pass it off to Elliott. Elliott, could you do a short introduction and also an introduction to your legal kiosk program?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So my name is Elliott Fontenette. I'm with the Texas Legal Services Center. Born in New Orleans, went to LSU for finance undergrad, went to UT Law School. I've been at TLSC since 2009. I'm going into my 14th or 15th year, depending on how you count the internship. Because like I started as an intern and then I became a staff attorney. Now I'm a managing attorney, then a special man. It's a whole thing. So, but I want to share my screen real quick. So TLC was founded in 1981. We're a statewide nonprofit organization. We provide advice, advocacy, representation, education, and serve people across the state. We have more than a dozen practice areas. I have to do this slide because my communications person would rightfully get very, very upset with me if I did not do that slide. So I try my best to touch down people, make people upset. That is my watchword. So the virtual court kiosks for us are within the Virtual Court Access Project. As a part of that project, we put 25 kiosks across Texas. The project is more of a pilot project in that we're trying to sort of prove use case, prove that it's a usable situation, because if it is, Texas has 254 counties. Eventually, 10 years down the road, if we're still doing it, we want to have a kiosk in every county. We also developed a complete suite of legal information on Texas law help about virtual court, and we provide live support using chat and phone to users conducting virtual hearings. Let's see, got a few other things. These are the maps of our kiosk sites across Texas. We only have one gap in around Midland, but Texas is so big, we had to make some choices. So we have all of them online. We have some in Colonias, the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas. Domestic violence survivors, we have 5 at domestic violence shelters. And we have 1 in Boat People SOS in Houston that's targeted towards Native Vietnamese speakers. And then 1 in Amarillo that's targeted towards unhoused individuals. We were agreed to do this project in July of 2022. We started, fleshing it out August to October of 2022. We hired A2J Tech in November of 2022. First kiosks were delivered in January 2023. All of them were online by October of 2023. We had our actual ribbon cutting. If you've never had a ribbon cutting, I highly recommend it. 10 out of 10, no notes, would recommend. Phase 2 was all about increasing capacity. So we did an accessibility audit. We have a kiosk support website. We have a full suite of supporting videos, and we had an outreach and marketing study done. Currently, what we're doing is we're implementing translation. We're keeping on working on our feedback system. We're developing an AI chatbot. We did the kiosk liaison program. That's a way to make sure that every kiosk has sort of a personal touch. So we have about 7 liaisons that are TLC staff that are each assigned 3 to 4 kiosk sites to drive use. And that is for sure a luxury that we have. In our plans going forward, we're expanding outreach. We're really, really focused on outreach, and we're trying to increase the ways a virtual court kiosk can be used. And we're actually currently working with A2J Tech to streamline providing advice, because when we first got the project, sort of the tail end of the pandemic, and I don't know how you define where the pandemic is over, but today, at least for me, is the 4-year anniversary of the pandemic hitting, because the 13th of March 2020 was the first day I was home from everything. So virtual court isn't as ubiquitous as it used to be. It's still going on, but we wanted to make sure there's another use case to really drive use. So for instance, we also, we learned from Minnesota, and it's in Nevada. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not. Okay. I will work on it. We have locations in public libraries and law libraries, and we want to drive a lot of that traffic that would just regularly go to one of their regular computers to the kiosk to get legal advice, because we have attorneys on the other end that can provide that free legal advice. That's actually how I started. We started a program back in 2010 to provide free legal advice on Texas law help. In the first year, we started in May of 2010, we did 531 chats. And in 2020, we had over 29,000 chats. So this stuff, that's all to sort of tie a bow on this. The kiosk project, it can start slow, but if you just stick with it, it can really take off. So that's our project.
Thanks, Elliott. So now that we knocked out introductions, I'm going to go ahead and get us started on the moderated questions. But to our audience members that are here, feel free to use the Q&A feature or to drop something in the chat, and we'll make sure to include it in our questions coming up. So the first question we have here is, how are you able to determine what features you wanted members of your community to have access to on a legal kiosk? So I'm going to give this to Dori to kick us off with.
Sure. So I mentioned that we started this project in 2020, spurred by the pandemic. And I think you were talking, Laura, about how hard it would be for you, like when you were in law school, doing anything on a cell phone. And I tell the story sometimes about when we first went virtual, There was a staff attorney who said they were working with a client who was in a really small town called Cherry, Minnesota, where internet access is challenging. I mean, you have to find certain areas in that geographic location for bars. And so if you're trying to send a document to your attorney to take a look at, you're taking, pictures of every single pages of a 40-page document and then trying to find a place to send them. We were like, okay, we have to have printer scanner internet capability features because this is just not going to work if we don't have that. So we knew that confidentiality, printer scanners, and accessibility for individuals were just key features for our kiosk when we were really developing our prototype. And so the confidentiality piece, we had software that ensured that any data that anybody was entering into the kiosk when they sat down for a session was wiped after their session was over. And so we use, Laura, I don't know if you'll talk about it later, but like deep freeze technology to keep the kiosk software or to keep the information confidential in sort of that kiosk setting. And I talked about printer scanners. So we have those available where there's a confidential setting. So we have two different models. There's a model A, which is, they are in more public locations. You can walk up to this. It's on a medical grade stand, and you can apply for legal assistance. You can get legal information, but it's not really designed for confidential meetings. And so those are really what our model Bs were for. And those are the ones that also have the printer scanners. And so really the host site requirement was, let's make sure that they're a confidential space, even if it's really small. Like as long as it's a confidential space, we can have the printer scanners there. And I'm sure we can talk about more softwares later, but those are the highlights, I'd say, for this question.
Great, thank you, Dori. I'm now going to pass it off to Susan. I know, Susan, you had to add your own legal help website interface. So I would love to hear more about that.
That's our interface. And so as you can see, I kind of had to build. So that was one of the other things I didn't realize when I took the position, that what was entailed in terms of ours was a little more complicated to build out because we no longer had a law help. Apparently NLS used to maintain it, and then for whatever reason, decision before my time, didn't anymore. So with the 5 different legal aids, there were people would just try to Google around and figure out what's the best resource, and there was no one place to find all of that. So I basically had to create that, and this is just a screenshot, but under legal help and forms is where it takes you to the referrals to the different legal aids, and it's broken down by geography, what areas they serve, et cetera. So people have that information there and know who to contact. Legal research resources, as I said, our state Supreme Court law librarian has been instrumental. So that links to the law libraries in addition to some other research services. One of the things in ours was that I limited it to nonprofits. There's no links to for-profit companies like Lexus or whatever. So it's all nonprofit free services, which was important given our audience. And let's see what we wanted. The question is what features we wanted. So that was the main one, is how to get information that everybody statewide could use that was in one place. And how we determined that was, I just spoke with the stakeholders, the different legal aids, made sure what they wanted us to highlight. And I just spent a lot of time going through websites. Luckily, I've been practicing, licensed in Nevada since 1993. So, and had been at Legal Aid Center, like I said, for 11 years before that. So I had a pretty good idea of the resources that were available, and just pulling all of that together was our main main feature that we needed.
All right, Elliott.
So we basically contacted Minnesota and went to school on what they did. And we studied a few of the programs and then combine that with talking to A2J and just what we knew, and we came up with a pretty good first run, I would say. Um, and we're actually going back now and adding features. We're not taking anything out. We're just adding things to inspire more use cases, because obviously the more ways a product can be used, the more it's going to be used. And we really don't like our fail case for this is if these are just sitting there not being used. And they don't have to be used, all the time, but they need to be used. And so we're just trying to get as many use cases that are effective as possible on the kiosk. But yeah, we were lucky enough to study Minnesota.
Kind of piggybacking on Dori again, a lot of Nevada, I mean, we have the urban areas where people might not, for financial reasons, have access to a computer, but we also have in our rural areas, if you drive through Nevada, there's a lot of radio silence for the cell phones. You drive between a couple of mountains, through a mountain pass, you don't have cell service. So some of these small areas, it's really a problem. If you want to advance a couple of slides, these are some pictures. Go to the next one, because speaking of the issue. So these are our most rural locations, and we generally use the same table setup that you've seen in the other pictures. But sometimes we didn't have a choice in order to get it into some of the very small libraries. And the one there, Silver Stage, that's the picture of their outside. So you can see how sometimes cell service is an issue, and all we were able to fit was on that cart. So it's not as private as we would have liked, as we've tried to make some of the others, but it was that or no kiosk. So sometimes we had to make that decision. So that was one of the goals, is to get them into areas that maybe couldn't fit ideally how we'd like to do it, but it was important that they have the access.
So I think, Susan, you were talking about this part right here. But you could go ahead and start us off with what was your process for selecting a host site to house a legal kiosk program?
So of course, our grant was written for libraries, so that at least helped. But I did talk to some other, especially in Washoe County, which is Reno, there's kind of some hybrid, like they have some programs, they have a law library in their courthouse. And so, but I talked to them but went with just public libraries rather than law libraries, because the law librarians can help people already with legal issues. So basically I did some research on demographics for the senior populations, both within Clark County, which locations would serve the most seniors, but also around the state, who had the highest percentage of seniors. So it was a combination of that and just general lack of access to resources. And then I just started cold calling libraries. And actually, well, some of them, in fairness, when the grant was proposed, we had some letters of support from a couple of library districts. So, I worked with them, and honestly, they didn't seem as excited once it came down to it as they had been in the generic letter. So there's a little bit of a sales job. For example, one large library district that shall remain nameless asked if I was going to come fill the paper on the printers. So it was becoming obvious they didn't want to do a whole lot. Now that they have them, they like them, but it was getting over that educational hump of what we could do. And of course, I didn't have it designed yet. I was just, we're planning to do this. Are you in? And so I only had one library district that just outright declined. And it's funny because after we got them going nearby, we were getting calls from people in that community. Well, why don't we have one? You'll have to talk to your library district. But, and actually we are in the process of expanding. So some of the libraries that didn't get back to us soon enough or whatever. We're working on building out a few more because we still have some funds left. Of course, we've got a budget that's a little over, I think, a tenth of what Minnesota had. So I was very concerned about getting it done and not running out of money with the first batch, but that's a different issue. But it was really just cold calling, doing research, finding out who the library director was and calling him up and setting up a meeting, a Zoom at that time, and doing a demonstration, kind of showing Minnesota's too as an example. And, and we got 22 libraries, which was about what we could handle with the first budget. And so we've gotten really good feedback about them.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. Elliot, I saw you nodding really aggressively, so I'm going to pass it off to you to answer next.
Yeah, just to agree with Susan, there is a difference between support and commitment of we want to be a host site, and we definitely found that. The way we selected was to we have been doing and moderating Texas Law Help for the last 22 years now. And Texas Law Help is our statewide legal aid information website. And we, on that website, we write a bunch of information and forms, and we also work with the 44 plus other legal aid organizations in Texas to make that work. And what we did is we used the relationships from that project and then TLSC in general, and that we've developed over the years to say, okay, who do we already know that would fit the criteria? We knew we were looking for public libraries, law libraries, maybe, and then some that were more in the community. So we sort of, since we didn't really know which ones were going to have the best use, depending on how the use cases would shift over time, we sort of selected sort of all of the above. So we have 4 or 5 that are in law libraries. We have 4 or 5 that are in public libraries. We have 5 that are in domestic violence shelters. We have a few, like 3 or 4 that are in courthouses, just because we wanted to see where the demand would be and for what. And then a lot of it was beyond the ones we already knew, just cold calling. We would look on Google Maps and say, okay, which ones are by a bus stop? Which ones are within this radius of the court? Because you don't want a host site for Dallas out all the way, say in Canton, which is about 80 miles away. You want to make sure it's within a specific radius, so it makes sense for the user to go to that kiosk rather than just go to court or try to ask for an in-person hearing. So you want to consider the length from the courthouse, the distance to public transportation, and especially in Texas, because in Texas, public transportation is sort of thin on the ground, except for the biggest cities. And even then, it's not as ubiquitous as, say, the Northeast. And then you would also look for, who do we have a relationship with? And once all of those sort of coalesce, you would call and you just try to, get some commitments. But that process in itself easily took 6 months of just calling, and that's just to get 25 sites. So whenever you're thinking about putting a program together, just give yourself enough time to put it together. Now, sometimes if you have a pre-existing network, if you're, if you have, maybe you have a big sponsor or contact that's really putting their weight behind the project, you can get a lot more commitment a lot faster. But if you're just, one of the 8 organizations, I would give yourself at least 6 months to get 25.
Thanks so much, Elliot. And yes, Dori, I see you laughing. Yes, go
Yeah.
ahead.
It was Elliot, yes, that is the dream. And sometimes so if you can be planful with your timelines and you can give yourself that amount of time, that's wonderful and preferred, quite honestly. For Minnesota, I didn't tell our whole story, but we found out we received the 3.5 million in CARES Act money October 31st, 2020, and we had until December 31st. So we believe to expend the money. And
wow.
So, I know it was all hands on deck to procure and find the partnerships and deploy the kiosks to what's now 215 host sites.
Well, how did you get in contact with that many that fast? That's amazing.
I don't know how else to explain what all hands on deck
You
means,
just like
but
just sitting
it
down,
was
just call it.
we really had to leverage, and I'm sure everyone in a legal aid organization can relate to this. Like, you have so many pre-existing relationships, community partnerships. And if you offer, hey, this is an access point to us, this is the technology, we're going to host it. You might have to fill the paper in the printer, but you will be an access point. They want that bridge. I mean, that was for us, that was sort of the original prototype. Was we wanted to have something present in one of our tribal locations in Boys Fort, actually, and we wanted technology to be at Indian Health Services for people who identified they had a legal need, but we couldn't be there. And so that's how this all started. And so really, it's we ended up with many host sites that said yes, because they just wanted that opportunity. And so we have them now. Public libraries are amazing and absolutely a place that anyone should initially reach out to. That's been a real incredible partner for host sites. And they often will have the space for confidential conversations too, even if it's small. Like they can find ways to do it, and they find that to be a valuable resource. But we also do use law libraries for a host of reasons. There are sometimes staff at law libraries, but a lot of rural law libraries don't have anyone. And so it's nice to have a kiosk there so they can Zoom or communicate in real time with somebody and get the legal information, apply for legal services, etc. But we also have them at places like community action centers. So many rural locations only have things like, broadly named community centers. And so if any attendee here today looks at the Legal Kiosks website, you can look at the various types of locations. It'll list the different host sites. It'll show you the variety of places. For us, there are a number of them that are not listed on there because they're not public facing, like domestic violence centers, for example. But that's been a great, also an incredible opportunity to have survivors have the ability to appear for court from the safety of these partner organizations. I can't tell you how valuable that's been for folks that we've been working with. But yeah, those are just some examples of the host sites. I will also say, just to touch back on what we talked about earlier, part of the reason we also had Model A's was it gave people an opportunity, host sites an opportunity to see if this would be a good fit, and then to see if they would like a Model A to turn into a Model B. Like, could they commit a private space for the kiosk? And so they're actually designed, like the computers themselves are designed to be easily converted into Model Bs if a site chooses to have that type of space. And so that's something that we've been working on.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Dori. And Dori, I'm actually going to start you off with one of our first questions here that you answered already in the chat and the Q&A panel. So if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to use that Q&A panel or to type it in the chat. So the first question we have is, how do you find success with kiosks in libraries? Our organization has found that kiosks get low usage there. Any specific suggestions to help with that?
Yeah, and so I just responded back in chat that it's really important to carve out time to work with the staff at host sites and to have a point person and materials and information so that they understand the tool, they understand the kiosk and when to refer people to it. If it's just passively present at a host site, then the engagement will probably be low. Like if the patrons have to figure out what it is or how it applies to them, they sort of need that sort of ambassador at the organization to say, hey, like we have this here, this might be useful for you. And so I would start there. but I'm sure Susan has lots of ideas too on how to engage the public library staff.
Yeah, I think I had referred to this. I actually got and I don't even remember how this happened because she started about the same time as we were installing the kiosks, but our Supreme Court law librarian has been invaluable, and she and I came up with a training program, and we did a tour, some virtual, some in person, of the host site libraries, and did training for the staff on generally how to provide legal information, not legal advice, and using the kiosks, and went through specifically where they could find things on the kiosks that would be probably most useful for their patrons. So yeah, getting the buy-in from the library staff is crucial, and not just, installing it and leaving. And A2J Tech, and, as you know, if there are technical issues, there's somebody to deal with that. But we just recently had an issue where they found that the person was printing out job postings from all over using the kiosk. So we're working through that. So you have to be responsive if they have questions or concerns. But I think the main thing is the training, also signage, and our libraries publicized. And I know there's a later question about publicity or promotion, but they put it on their Facebook pages and their websites, and we gave them posters that they could hang up in the library and things like that. So, and if you're in a small town that, if it still has a local newspaper, which I know they're a dying breed, but we, in our Churchill County location, which is Fallon, Nevada, the local paper did a big article about the new librarian and the new kiosks. So, whatever word you can get out to the community is great, but really getting the buy-in of the library so that they see the use and usefulness and promote it in-house.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Elliot.
No worries. I
Go
just,
ahead and dive in.
yeah, I also just wanted to echo exactly what they said. Like, that's exactly what you have to do. You really have to engage with the host site. But what we're also doing, and I think I said this earlier, but we're working with A2J Tech to prioritize getting free legal advice on the kiosk, since we have that program. Because from what we see with public libraries in Texas, they get a lot of people coming in, questions about divorce, questions about child support, eviction. And so we wanted to be the gateway to that service so that we push them to the kiosk. So we're in the final steps of designing, it's called a table tent. It's just like something that sits on top of the front desk of the library that really just says free legal advice at the kiosk. So we're going to be pushing people. So it's like you got to work with the host site, but that also includes taking their feedback and making changes to the interface if you need to really accommodate what they want. So another example is out in really far-flung West Texas, say Presidio County, which is like right around Big Bend. It's by Mexico and New Mexico, I think. There's not a law library within 150 miles. So we're working with the Texas State Law Library to make their online legal research easily available on a kiosk, so that you can go to a kiosk and do your legal research there. And ideally, it would feel like, it would feel like as close to a law library as possible. Besides the fact that the books smell amazing at a law library. I love law libraries.
Thank you guys so much. It looks like we have time for one more question on our slides, and I'll go back to answering questions from the audience. So let me dive into marketing and outreach. I think this is one of the biggest questions that we get. So I'm gonna pass this off to Elliot. How are you making your community aware of your legal kiosk program?
That's a wonderful question. So what we did, and we did this in December and January, because we're in the second year, but we're still at the start of the project when you really look at it cohesively. We came up with a strategic outreach and use plan, and we based that off of a marketing and positioning study done by a consultant back in August. And what that plan does is it really sets out that there's sort of two components when you're thinking about making the community aware. It's what outreach are you going to do, but what uses are you going to have for that kiosk too? Because use is going to drive outreach. So, for instance, at the Dallas County Law Library, which is within the Dallas County Courthouse, it's going to be less used for virtual hearings as it is going to be for legal advice. Whereas for the um, for a site at, say, Forum Communities, which is in San Antonio, that one probably will be used for virtual hearings. And so once you know your primary use, you can come up with what we're doing right now. Actually, I have to do mine later today, a host site-specific outreach and use plan to say, okay, for the Austin Public Library, Little Walnut Creek branch, this is the use. Here's who we're reaching out to. Here's who we're reaching out to. Here's where we're putting information. And we also have 3 or 4 different levels of outreach targets, depending on what we want them to do. So our number one most important outreach target are the courts, because what we did is we went and cataloged all the courts still doing virtual hearings in Texas, in counties where we have a virtual court kiosk. And there are about 170. And so what we did is we did a mail out of a pretty comprehensive package on the kiosk to those 170 sites. And what we're doing right now is we're following up and calling them, and we're getting conversations started to where either they tell us, hey, leave us alone, or hey, we can help you in X, Y, and Z way. Our ideal for the courts is that not only do they recommend the kiosk, but the court coordinator puts a notice about the kiosk in every notice of remote proceeding that goes out to a litigant. So you catch them right at that moment that they're thinking about it. Also, we're working with some statewide partners. Like I actually have a meeting at 3 with the Texas Office of the Attorney General Child Support Division, because they actually got permission in the last legislative session in Texas to keep a lot of their hearings remote. And the thing about the Texas child support system is not only is child support established in the Texas child support system, but also is visitation and custody. So that handles a bunch of cases every year. And so we're working with them to say, hey, can we put a message about these kiosks in there? Because if you can piggyback on these notices that are already going out, that will do most of your work for you. Our next level is we're talking to clerks to see if they can recommend it. We're providing them with outreach materials. Then what we're doing is we're saying, okay, within, say, a 30 to 40-mile radius, which nonprofits, public libraries, community centers can we reach out to and let them know about the kiosk? Maybe do a training. I'm actually coming up with a standard email to send potential external partners so that they can, reach out. They can tell their litigants about it. So say if somebody's at the library, if somebody is at a community center in Mueller, which is say about 3 miles from the public library in Austin that has a kiosk, and somebody goes, oh, I really could use some advice. They could go, hey, you can go to Texas Law Help, but there's also this kiosk that's like a gateway to legal aid, and it's completely free, and it's at the Little Walnut Creek branch. So, and then the last level is local businesses. What we're doing is we just want to see if they will put up a poster for us so we can build that general awareness of the kiosk. And then the last thing we're doing is going out directly to users. But the way we're doing it is, since we control our statewide legal aid information website that gets over 5 million people looking at it a year, what I'm doing right now, I'm going to do it next week. I'm going to go through every page of that site, and I'm going to say, okay, for this page, say divorce, and it's an uncontested divorce. Where does it make sense if I'm a user to see information on the kiosk? So step 10 of the uncontested divorce without children talks about your uncontested hearing. Well, right there's going to be a little line that says, is your hearing online? Do you not have a PC or a stable internet connection? Click here to find a map of kiosks in your area where you can do your virtual hearing for free. So the key is just hitting people where they're already thinking about it, because so many people, actively avoid legal situations. Like I'll say for myself, I'm an attorney, and I got a notice last July that my ID was stolen for somebody to apply for unemployment benefits. And I didn't look at that for 2 days because I was like, I don't feel like doing this. So you got to really catch people when they're thinking about it and they're willing to actually look at the stuff. That's what we're doing for outreach.
Thank you so much, Elliot. And Dori, Susan, if you have some thoughts on this as well, feel free to chime in.
Sure. I think Elliot touched on a lot of the ways that really are leveraging your strengths to be able and leveraging other resources to market the kiosks. The partnerships with the courts is a big one. The Legal Kiosk Project in Minnesota is listed as the #1 resource and tool for virtual courts on the Minnesota Courts website. And so that's been an incredible partnership, collaboration, and source for marketing. I would say also coming up with sort of like a media kit for the host site, so they are able to put out in their own publications or their own local newspapers or their own newsletters, that they have a legal kiosk and what it's for, and really framing that for their, the people that are utilizing them. I think that's a great way to get that out. What I will say is when you are, like, if you're interested in creating a kiosk project, you have to make sure that you are putting in a marketing line item in your budget. And I feel like that is still something that legal aid programs struggle with in general. Like every dollar must go towards direct services. So please know that marketing is key. This is not the field of dreams. Like you can't just build these and think people are going to come. You do have to invest in the messaging, marketing, and outreach piece.
I wanted to add that our experience has been a little different in that we had a lot of money in our budget for a public relations firm, which I haven't done that yet. I actually have a meeting with somebody next week because there was a grave miscalculation about what, and I wasn't involved in the budget. It was I was hired after this was done, but we were able to move some things around. There was a big underestimate of the cost of the web development. Of course, ours also, because I had to basically build our own law help, took a little more than what was anticipated, but the way our grant was written, it didn't anticipate a lot of those expenses. So I shifted the funds for marketing. That said, because we were able to do it pretty efficiently, I still do have funds left. So I'm going to be meeting with some marketing people in the next week. But I agree, we sent the posters that A2J had as part of, our project, to all the libraries and took care of a lot of that. We had a big press release at the beginning of the kiosks that got a lot of interest, but that was, 9 months ago about, so it's time to start pushing it again. But I don't know that I have a lot else to add other than I agree with Dori that make sure there is money in your budget. Ours was just skewed almost too much for publicity, but we'll see. I'll know next week what that's actually going to cost.
All right, thank you guys. It looks like we have at least one time for, or some time for this last question here. This is from Evan. Have you seen variation in representative demographics? How do the people accessing your services via kiosk differ from the people who are using the other, perhaps more traditional means? Have you guys noticed any differences?
I could chime in with a quick story. So recently, we represent people in tribal court, and the tribal courts we represent people in tribal court as well as district court. But so we have a staff attorney that was at tribal court, and she noticed that there was a woman that was there that had been in tribal court for a child protection matter. And so it was under tribal court's jurisdiction. She was finishing that matter, but she was stressed because she actually had a criminal matter she had to appear for in district court, but the district court was an hour away from where she was. And so she was really nervous because that meant there would be a warrant And obviously the implications of that would impact her child protection case. So luckily, the attorney that was there said, "Hey, there's a kiosk here at the Tribal Court Center. Would you like to use this legal kiosk to attend your criminal matter?" And so she was able to attend her criminal matter, handle that, ensure there wasn't a warrant. And so, but for like having a legal kiosk in a tribal court center, she wouldn't have been able to do that. So I think that is not your traditional way of accessing service. This was leveraging a partnership with the tribal court nations that we are, the tribal nations and the courts that we are working with in our geographic region. And so it's different in the sense that we're creating more non-traditional entry points for access to the court system and access to us. And so I think we're just reaching a whole different demographic of individuals that would not leverage us, but for the investment in this project.
That is such an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dori. I know we have oh, we don't have time anymore. But Susan, Elliott, if you want to add something to this question, feel free to. I know your programs are relatively new, but have you guys seen any differences in the demographics?
I don't really know. And I meant to add in my last comment, we're not finding the use for virtual court the way that I think was anticipated. Of course, a lot of our courts are back at least partially in person. So ours is getting used more for the information aspect or finding referrals to whether it's the legal aids or community resources or information. So I just wanted to add that. Ours, we're not finding as much virtual use as some of the other places. And it may be just our geography. It may have something to do with that. And so I don't know what the reason is, but in terms of representative demographics, I mean, one of the things that we looked at, and I think Elliott mentioned this, was on, at least in our urban locations, are they on a bus line? So a lot of it is people who don't have an easy way to get downtown to the courthouse or the law library. So we're finding people who are, on the bus using them a lot.
Anything to add, Elliott?
Yeah, just feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Like, this is a pretty, what's the word? This is a pretty niche area of legal aid. So I would love to be able to pay forward the wonderful help that Minnesota gave me at the start. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Perfect. Thank you, Dori. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Elliott. And thank you, everyone that has attended this event today. I apologize that we went over, but we're also going to be sharing the slides and the contact information of our panelists. So if you need to reach out to them with any additional questions, feel free to. Thank you so much for your time, guys.